While 80,000 thoughts will bombard you today, just one conversation can make you 1% better. If you walk around with your nose in the air, you're going to end up flat on your face. But if you're content to simply be yourself, you'll become more than yourself. Thanks for hanging with us today as we discuss what erodes and cultivates growth, making us 1% better. Welcome to 1% Better with Marc Lucas and Brandon Mouer.
Welcome to 1% Better. What a joy it is to be able to take this journey with you. We are so excited today to be able to have a conversation around strongholds. Just dive right into it, Marc. The reality is that this show, our desire for us and for you is that God would meet you in a place of growth, and we would understand that growth happens from the inside out. So today we really look at what are strongholds, how are they impeding and affecting the growth that's happening in you and happening in myself? And we get to dive into these conversations and then breaking down strongholds, how we're going to be able to do that. We got the perfect guest today to be able to have this conversation. I am honored and so thankful, Brandon and I both, to have Carissa in studio today. She's the founder of Reset Ministries. For over 20 years, Carissa has been helping people grow in one capacity or another as students, athletes, disciples, or leaders. She is so passionate about prayer and incorporating emotional health and relational growth into that discipleship process. Carissa is an effective communicator who loves to pioneer new things, fight for the underdog, and awaken others to the presence of God. Carissa, thanks for being our guest today.
Sure. I'm so glad to be here.
It's good to have you in. And I know we're just jumping into a pretty heavy conversation, but yet I know and you know that we have to navigate strongholds. We see passages like in Ephesians 6 that talks about that we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but we wrestle against the principalities of war. We wrestle against the unseen things in the spiritual battle that we are in today and really every day. So we thought we'd just have you in. We're honored to have you in and really dive into a conversation regarding strongholds. Why don't we start with that first question, just looking at body, soul, and spirit. A lot of times we get fuzzy when it comes to really understanding the soul specifically, but really navigating the importance of understanding the body, soul, and spirit when it comes to understanding strongholds in our life.
Yeah, so we'll just jump right into the deep waters here. But it's just doing a 30,000 foot view of body, soul, spirit that gives us a language to talk about strongholds. So I like to think of it in terms of the Bible so often compares us to being some sort of a container, like a tent in one place, a temple in another place, a jar of clay that holds a treasure. And then even Jesus says, he talks about our house being swept clean. And so there's this inner cleansing that needs to happen. And so the Bible is saying that we're like a house. And so I have one house, but it has many rooms. And so for us spiritually, the whole concept of body, soul, spirit, it gives us a language for talking about that cleansing process or sanctification process or just cleaning out those parts of our lives where we feel stuck so that we're able to move forward. When we talk about the body is how we interact with the natural world around us. We get that part. Like we're looking at each other now. It's the visible part of us. We have natural ears. We have natural eyes. We can taste. We can touch. So we get that part. But that's just housing the important part of us, which is our soul and our spirit. So in the same way that our natural body interacts with the natural world, our spirit, which is really the core of who we are, interacts with the spiritual world of God. So that's where we hear God's voice. That's where we understand spiritual truth. But then our soul is sort of it's where it can get pretty messy. Mm-hmm. It's kind of the in-between part where we take the natural world that we're living in, our natural body, and then this spiritual part of us that can host God, and that's where we become one with God when we become a believer. That's where we hear God's voice. So we have these two parts, and it's like it comes together in our soul, and we become a living being, a living personality. In our soul is our mind, our will, and our emotions. So I like to think of the mind as our instrument for thinking. So we have the ability to reason, make decisions. Our our emotions are our instrument for feeling. So just like God, just like Jesus, we have the full range of emotions, everything from love to hate to jealousy. God's wired us that way on purpose. But then also we have our will in our soul, which is our instrument for making decisions. So if you think of it, we're part body, we've got a spirit, we have our soul. So our will, it's kind of like a steering wheel. It's like God's put this power of free choice in us. At any moment, we can agree with what God says, especially as we mature in Christ, so we get used to his voice. And we can agree with what God wants, or we can agree with the lusts of our body, or we can be led by our emotions or our own intellect. And so there's this battleground in our soul after we become a believer. Really, it's for the Holy Spirit taking more territory and becoming Lord of our lives so that he can be freely expressed to us.
That was so good. That was so beautifully said. Thank you for, breaking that down. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was
And I think
great.
it's really important for us to be able to break that down, diving into this conversation today. And I think one of the things that we are constantly navigating and constantly praying in our lives and the lives of the listeners that are with us in this journey is, what are the things when we have that awareness, when we kind of do the inventory of the different rooms that we have within our soul, what are the things that we have to really be fighting against? What are the areas that we have to really go against in this spiritual battle, and to begin to identify what are those strongholds? What are the areas right now that there are those kind of flaming arrows that are coming in, and there are those things that are really pulling us away from the image of God, us being Imago Dei, really reflecting God's image. And at the end of the day, this is a great visual to kind of set us up to say, okay, now that we understand kind of the evaluation that we have in the rooms, now in our soul and what that looks like, now really defining what is a stronghold, like transitioning into really a definition now, Carissa.
Sure. So simply put, I would define strongholds as a thought pattern that's built on a lie. And this can look so many ways for so many people because we all have different stories. And it's really cyclical. And so there's 4 parts of how a stronghold is actually built. It always starts with a negative event, a negative life event. And so for some of us, we can look back and we can point to a moment in time, and we can remember the day that we sat down in the living room with our parents and they said that they're getting a divorce, and it was a negative life event. For some of us, it might be bullying that happened in middle school. And for years, we heard things spoken over us. And for others, it might be abuse. For other people, it maybe isn't a moment in time, but we can look back over our childhood. And now that we're grown up, we can say that family system that I was brought up in was highly dysfunctional. There wasn't one moment, but the whole process of growing up was an event. And for some people, it's a religious system that we're in, highly legalistic environment where we have this view of God as real punitive and condemning. And so all of us have events. We all have negative life events that we can point back, and especially as we become adults, and say that affected me. So it starts with the event, and then the next phase is really where we get trapped, and that's the lie. Because it's no matter how negative or awful our events are, that's not what has us stuck. What has us stuck is how we interpreted those events. And so we talked about spiritual warfare at the beginning. What the enemy loves to do is in those moments, especially when we're kids, he loves to interpret what's happening to us. At some point, we always start asking the question, why? Why did mom and dad get divorced? Why did my mom pass away? Why are they saying these things? And the enemy likes to interpret those things and answer that question for his purposes. And so, well, mom and dad are getting divorced because you couldn't behave. It's all your fault. Or mom passed away because God doesn't hear prayers. Matter of fact, God isn't real. And so the interpretation of what happens to us, that's the lie. And that's what gets us stuck. And it really lands in this deep place in our soul where it's a core lie. And it's usually an identity thing, where we think we're not worthy enough or we're not good enough. So there's the event, there's the lie, and then we move into this phase of defense and comfort, where we're trying to defend ourselves because we're operating out of a lie. So if our lie, let's say, is that we're not worthy of love, we start defending that person that isn't. If anyone touches anywhere near our wound, it depends how we're wired. For some of us, we get angry. For some of us, we isolate. For other people, we use humor. You've ever been around those people where you're like, can't you ever be serious?
Yeah.
It's really no.
Yeah. Sarcasm is your love language.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And even I've seen in ministry, people will hide behind what I would call altruism, just doing good deeds and doing ministry, but they're protecting that wounded version of themselves. It's almost like, look at these great things that I'm doing, and it's avoiding dealing with a wound from the past. So we defend ourselves, but then we also comfort ourselves because we're hurt. And so we're trying to minister to the pain. And so for some people, it's excessive behavior, like working or shopping or video gaming, like done in a lesser way. Those things aren't bad. But when it becomes a coping mechanism, it can cause problems in our life. And then other ways that we comfort ourselves through substance abuse or promiscuity or pornography. Again, we're ministering to the pain. And then the fourth part is the reaction of other people. And so people are responded to the wounded version of ourselves, the angry person, the substance abuse, the workaholic, and it typically ends in rejection, whether that's relationally or professionally. And then that kicks us back into the first phase of it's a new event. It's a new negative life event, and then it reinforces the same lie. I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy of love. So those themes that I've been playing throughout my life, it reinforces that. We defend ourselves, we comfort, people react, and it's just like a physical stronghold. Brick by brick, we start building this wall. And you guys, I'm sure, have had this experience when you're around people and it's like, there's like a wall up. I can't get to that person. I don't have access to that person. It's because there's a wall in their soul. There's strongholds based on the lie and how they're responding.
There's so much that you just shared that's just beautiful for us to be able to just kind of go a little bit deeper on some of the things you just shared. And if you're just tuning in, joining us via radio right now, we've got Carissa with Reset Ministries, and we're having a conversation around strongholds. One of the things, a lot that I just took away there, but one of the things that I first heard was, first off, we all have strongholds. Mm-hmm. So identifying that we are all in this conversation together. And really, strongholds more or less happen from a root of a negative reality. So whatever that negative reality might be, that's probably the origin of where the stronghold began. And then the enemy begins to speak lies into our soul, lies into our minds, to really probably start building a picture of shame and really affecting our identity and who we are in Christ. So I love just kind of a quick flyover. There's more than you shared, but just a quick flyover of kind of the foundational truths of what a stronghold is. And that's fantastic. I think one of the things, if I'm right now taking this and also listening into this conversation, however I am right now, I want to know, maybe help us understand some of the warning lights, help us understand maybe some of the indicators that help us know maybe we have a stronghold, because we've already identified that we're all in this category, but help us create some warning lights that say, you know what, if these things are happening, then you're probably walking out a pattern of a stronghold. You're probably living under the oppression of a stronghold. So it's maybe hard to really identify just maybe a few, but maybe just some thoughts. And you shared some, Carissa, but just some thoughts about, because the reality is for me, I always say, okay, when I wake up in the morning, for the most part, I know I'm going to face a negative reality. So I want to normalize that, because that's a normal reality. But I want to ask myself, okay, how do I process this throughout my day when I face a negative reality? How do I synthesize or really kind of grow and learn from it? And how do I really have a heightened awareness to the negative realities and what God's teaching me through them, to not believe the lie of the enemy, but believe truly the truths of who I am and hold on to those promises of God? So I guess, and it's a big question, and I don't know if we can get it in the short time we have, but maybe just some common warning lights that you see that really will help our listeners understand, okay, maybe I am walking in a stronghold right now.
It's a big question, but it's a really good question because it's really at the core of what we're trying to get at, which is, do I have one and how does it get torn down? I think the best analogy is, let's say I used to play sports. So let's say I sprained my ankle playing basketball. I go to the doctor and they always put you up on the table, start bending your ankle, start poking at it. And when they hit that spot, I mean, you know it. I mean, it hurts, you know. Does this hurt? No. Does this hurt? Yes, that one hurt. But emotionally, it's the same way. And so if we take an inventory of when someone triggers us, it's connected to a wound. So someone maybe is sarcastic with us, not a big deal. But if they're sarcastic with us in an area of our woundedness, Little Miss Nasty might come out, or the angry person might come out, or I want to withdraw. But we know when we're emotionally triggered, if we can tune into those emotions. You mentioned, I think, the warning lights. Our emotions really are like a dashboard on a car, like to check fuel, washer fluid's low. We shouldn't take a hammer to the dashboard, but those emotions are telling us what's going on under the hood. And so if we feel this thrust of anger come up, or shame or insecurity, someone has hit that pain point in our soul, and our God-given emotions that we're wired with are telling us that we need to do something. You know, we need to pull over, we need to get help, we need to check the engine. And so it's those pain points that are telling us where we have strongholds.
That's really, really good. I love it. And I think one of the things that I personally have taken in this last couple of years of my life is understand the importance of emotions and really being able to track those, being able to journal those, being able to give those to God, being able to see where I'm at and to express those emotions to God and have an understanding where I am day by day, and even going back and looking the last week or the last month and really seeing a real understanding barometer-wise, this is where I am in this season with God. And if there are some emotions, like you said, that really just trigger quickly, places of anger, defensiveness, whatever that quick response, but kind of a high energy, unpleasant emotion, then I know in that place, I've got to really do some work and I've got to really ask myself, what is this connected to? What is this rooted to? Deep down from family of origin, from my past, from relationships, from the brokenness and the wounding, what is this connected to? And I love that. What a great barometer for us and kind of the warning lights of emotions that we have on all of our dashboards in our souls to be able to process that. So I love that. So good, Carissa. How are strongholds formed? I know you've mentioned this and we've gotten into this, but just real concise, how are strongholds formed?
Yeah, so it's really the cycle that I was mentioning there. It's the event, it's believing the lie, it's defending and comforting ourselves, and then people reacting to that version of ourselves creates a new event, reinforces the lie. And so you think of a physical stronghold, they're built brick by brick. Well, an emotional stronghold's the same way. It's lie by agreeing with the wrong voice. Whether it's a voice in our own soul or it's a voice of the evil one, we're laying down these bricks in our soul that are invisible, but other people can feel them. And it really is all about the lie, which of course we don't know is a lie. If we knew it was a lie, we wouldn't believe it. But it's our truth. You know, we really may think, oh, I'm not good enough for this promotion at work, or no one's ever going to love me. We may not say it out loud, but it puts a limit on us because we actually believe those things. And so brick by brick, year after year, agreeing with lies, we find ourselves in certain areas of our soul, whether it's in an intellectual way or in our mind or an emotional wounding, we find ourselves entrapped by them.
I was going to say, I'm here. I was going to say, it's funny how, not funny, but for lack of a better word, culture, the world, after Genesis 3 has been in a stronghold since Genesis 3. Because you're talking about lies. Like, the first lie wasn't from a human, it was from the enemy to try to convince the human, we call her Eve in the Bible, that questioned God's truth, his standard, right? Did God really say, don't eat this low-hanging fruit, the forbidden fruit that is talked about still today? Rappers talk about it, and it's in movies, the low-hanging fruit. They don't identify it as the Bible, but it's there. And so once the first two humans gave into the lie, afterwards, every single thing has been built of sin, wrongdoing on a stronghold, or that has created this stronghold that now 2023, we're still living in the same lie, just built upon each other, if you will. That's interesting that you say that.
Yeah.
Just wanted to add that.
I love that you brought that up because it really is that agreement. I mean, they came out of agreement with God and came into agreement with the evil one. And that's the foundation of a stronghold. It's that power of what voice are you agreeing with? And, we don't have to dive way into it. But what's really interesting is they could eat from life, like God's the source of life. And it's almost like if you imagine they were plugged in to life, like an extension cord. When they ate of that, the tree of knowledge, which you go back to soul, is our mind. It's being dependent on ourselves. It's like they unplugged from the tree of life and they plugged into themselves and said, we want to be our own source. We want to operate out of the soul, our own thinking, out of our emotions. We want to use the power of our will. But what they didn't realize is that stronghold. They began a stronghold. And the first response was shame.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. It's good.
That's the exact first response. Yeah. And I think for us in the time that we do have left, I think this has been so insightful, and there's been so many paradigm shifts even for me, and so much knowledge that we've been able to really kind of lean into, but really getting to kind of the practical steps of how we tear down the strongholds. I want to make sure we have ample time for that, Carissa. So give the listeners just some steps to really begin the process of allowing the Lord to really tear down some of these strongholds that they might have right now in their life.
Right. That's the most important part, isn't it? So I mentioned this before, but the events, those aren't what have us stuck, even though those things, for some of us were extremely awful, but it's the lie. And so strongholds have to be dealt with on the lie level because the interpretation is what has us stuck. And so we can control that. We can't control what happened to us, but we can control what we believe. And so it's getting in God's presence and examining these areas where we're wounded or where we may have intellectual strongholds and examining them in the presence of God and allowing Him to speak, whether it's through His word or through those whispers. But it's really having the conversations with God about the things that He's wanting to talk about. So we're on a radio show right now. You have a dial, 1360. I like to think of that in terms of talking with God. So a lot of times we're on a dial with God, and it's like kind of all about me, AM. It's like, where do I go to college? Who do I marry? Where's my next job? Yeah.
Me, AM. I like it.
And we're broadcasting there, and our conversations with Him are about that. But He's over on a totally different station, and He wants to talk about what happened to us when we were 8. And we got sat down in the living room, and our parents got divorced, and how that was interpreted. But we're on a different frequency. But if we talk to God about the identity stuff and just unpack our story in His presence, and also just with safe, mature people that can help us process our journey, we can begin seeing the lie for what it is and replacing it with truth. And then we can also control how we defend and comfort ourselves. We're in control of that. We can't control the event. We can't control how people respond. But if we start believing the truth and start changing how we defend and comfort ourselves, people react to a totally different person. And then it creates new events that are positive, and the stronghold starts to come down.
That's beautiful. One of the things that I personally have loved in this conversation already is one of maybe the most important things I ever did in my walk with the Lord is beginning to identify and pray over the wounds and the lies that I've believed. And I remember years ago when I was in much better shape in my 20s, like
much better shape,
shaped like Brandon, I realized that there was a book that was given to me by John Eldredge, and it was called Wild at Heart.
I've read that book.
And chapter 6 is called The Wound. And I remember when I finished the chapter, I remember the challenge was by John, the author, identify a wound that you have from your father, your earthly dad. And I thought, what? I have a great earthly dad. But yet it was the first time that it forced me in a wonderful way to really hold up a mirror in front of my soul and to really do some deep diving and work and investigation to navigate what are the wounds? What are the wounds that I truly am walking in right now? And really being able to understand those. So I love this conversation so much. Thank you, Carissa, for being our guest today. Connect with Carissa and her team at Reset Ministries. The website is resetministries.us. Again, that's resetministries.us. Have a fantastic and amazing day. We'll talk to you real soon. Take care.
You're playing with my 1%. You're playing with my 1%. You're playing with my 1%.